Imagine waking up one morning and not knowing you are standing at the edge of a millennium. No fireworks, no countdown, no glowing screens announcing "Welcome to the year 1000." Just cold air, wet soil, church bells in the distance. If you had opened your eyes somewhere in Western Europe in the year 1000, you would not have felt like you were living in a dramatic chapter of history. You would have felt ordinary. And yet the world around you was quietly rebuilding itself after centuries of collapse. Before we step fully into that world, take a second to settle in. If stories like this help you see history differently, consider supporting the channel. A subscription, even a short comment about where you are watching from, helps more than you might think. It tells the algorithm that quiet, thoughtful history still matters. Now get comfortable. Maybe dim the lights just a little. Let us travel gently. Western Europe at the turn of the millennium was not a place of towering cities or global empires. It was rural, deeply rural. Nearly 90% of people lived in the countryside, working land owned by local lords. This was the age of feudalism, though no one used that word at the time. A peasant farmed, a knight fought, a lord governed. And above them all, spiritually at least, stood the church. Time itself belonged to the church. Bells rang to mark prayer. Holidays honored saints. Most people could not read, but they knew Bible stories through stained glass windows and sermons. Latin echoed in stone chapels even though villagers spoke early forms of French English or German. And despite what you may have heard, most Europeans were not panicking that the world would end in the year 1000. Modern historians have found very little evidence of widespread millennium fear. Many people did not even count years the way we do. If you were a farmer in what is now France, you probably measured time by harvests, not calendars. Still, this was not a peaceful paradise. In England, King Ethelred struggled against renewed Viking raids. In what we now call Germany, Otto III ruled the Holy Roman Empire and dreamed of restoring Roman greatness. Castles began appearing across the landscape, heavy stone symbols of both protection and power. Life expectancy averaged around 30 to 40 years, mostly because many children did not survive early childhood. But if you reached adulthood, you might live long enough to see grandchildren. Your world would be small, maybe no more than a few miles from where you were born. The night sky would be darker than anything we experience today. No city lights, just stars. It was a world that feels fragile to us, but it was also a world slowly stabilizing. Farms improved. Populations began rising. Trade routes, though modest, connected villages to markets. The foundations of medieval Europe were being laid quietly, almost humbly. And here is the fascinating part. While Europe was rebuilding in stone and prayer, elsewhere on the planet, something very different was happening. If you shift your gaze south and east, the center of gravity in the year 1000 looks nothing like muddy European fields. Let us move there next. Now, while European villages were lighting candles in small stone churches, another part of the world was glowing with something brighter: knowledge. If you could travel to Baghdad in the year 1000, you might think you had stepped into the future. The city, founded in the 8th century by the Abbasid caliphs, had become one of the largest urban centers on Earth. Some historians estimate its population may have reached several 100,000, possibly even approaching 1 million at its height. Wide avenues, markets filled with silk, spices, and paper, scholars debating under shaded courtyards. And at the heart of it all stood the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. Inside, translators worked tirelessly, preserving and expanding upon the writings of Aristotle, Plato, Hippocrates, and countless others. But this was not simple copying. It was innovation. Around the 9th century, the mathematician Al-Khwarizmi wrote a treatise that would later give us the word algebra. Yes, algebra.
Here is the payment,
The thing that may have caused you stress in high school, its roots trace back to this intellectual world. Hospitals in major Islamic cities were organized institutions with wards, trained physicians, and even medical licensing in some regions. Think about that for a moment. Structured hospitals centuries before similar systems appeared widely in Western Europe. And then there was Cordoba in what is now Spain. Under Islamic rule, it became one of the most advanced cities in Europe. Contemporary accounts describe paved streets and street lighting. Some sources suggest its libraries held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. Compare that to many European monasteries of the time which might guard a few dozen precious books. Does that shift your mental map of the year 1000? Trade networks stretched from the Iberian Peninsula across North Africa, through the Middle East, and into Central Asia and India. Merchants carried not only goods, but ideas. Astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy flowed along caravan routes and sea lanes. And here is something fascinating. The Islamic world did not simply preserve Greek knowledge. It improved it. Scholars like Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, wrote the Canon of Medicine, a text that would later be used in European universities for centuries. So while a farmer in France might rarely travel beyond his village, a merchant in Baghdad could encounter goods from China and stories from Africa. Two very different worlds. Same year. History is rarely as simple as advanced and backward. It depends on where you stand. And speaking of standing somewhere unexpected, if you think Baghdad and Cordoba were impressive, wait until you see what was happening even farther east. Let us follow the trade winds across Asia. If we keep traveling east beyond deserts and caravan routes beyond the Silk Road's dusty horizon, we arrive in a world that might feel almost unbelievably modern. Welcome to Song Dynasty China. Around the year 1000, China was not just another powerful civilization. Many historians argue it was the most technologically advanced society on Earth at the time. Imagine walking through Kaifeng, the northern Song capital. The city may have had more than 1 million residents. Let that settle in.
The amount is correct.
At a time when most European cities were home to perhaps 20 or 30,000 people, Kaifeng was a metropolis. Streets buzzed with merchants, scholars, artisans, entertainers. Markets operated late into the evening. Restaurants offered regional cuisines. Urban life was vibrant and organized. And then there was money. Not coins, paper. The Song government issued some of the world's earliest official paper currency. Think about how revolutionary that is. While much of the world still relied heavily on metal coins or barter, Chinese merchants were carrying printed notes representing value. That requires trust, bureaucracy, sophisticated accounting. Speaking of industry, Song China produced iron on a scale Europe would not reach for centuries. Historical estimates suggest annual iron output in the 11th century may have exceeded 100,000 tons. Iron for tools, plows, weapons construction. This was an economy humming with productivity. Printing technology also expanded during this era. Woodblock printing was widespread, making books more accessible. Literacy, especially among the educated class preparing for civil service examinations, was highly valued. Government officials were selected through rigorous exams based on Confucian classics. Imagine studying for years, not for fame or followers, but for a chance to serve in government administration. Does that sound surprisingly modern? Advanced canal systems, especially the Grand Canal, connected agricultural regions with urban centers. Grain moved efficiently. Trade flowed smoothly. The state invested heavily in infrastructure because it understood something simple: stability requires logistics. Meanwhile, innovations such as improved shipbuilding, magnetic compass navigation, and agricultural techniques, like fast ripening rice, supported population growth. By some estimates, China's population during the Song period may have approached 100 million people. Let that number sit beside Europe's far smaller population at the time. Different scale, different rhythm, same human drive to build, organize, and thrive. History often centers Europe when telling the story of the year 1000. But if we are honest, the global balance of power looked very different then. And yet even this is only part of the picture. Because while China innovated and the Islamic world flourished, powerful kingdoms were rising in places many Western textbooks barely mention. Let us widen the map even further. But the story of the year 1000 does not end in Europe, Baghdad, or China. Let us stretch the map a little wider. In Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, Emperor Basil II was strengthening one of the most resilient states of the medieval world. The Byzantine Empire was not a fading relic of Rome. It was wealthy, organized, and strategically brilliant. Its capital may have held several 100,000 people protected by the massive Theodosian walls that had already stood for centuries. Gold coins known as the solidus were trusted across the Mediterranean, while Western Europe, fragmented Byzantium, remained a powerhouse of diplomacy and military strength. Now travel south across the Sahara Desert. There in West Africa, the Kingdom of Ghana controlled one of the most valuable trade networks on Earth. Gold flowed north across camel caravans toward North Africa and beyond. Salt traveled south. Arab geographers later described the Ghanaian king as immensely wealthy, adorned in gold, commanding respect from traders who crossed dangerous desert routes. Europe's future wealth would one day depend heavily on African gold, but in the year 1000, African kingdoms were already central players in global commerce. Did you learn that in school? And across the Atlantic in Mesoamerica, the Toltec civilization flourished in central Mexico. Their capital, Tula, featured massive warrior statues carved in stone. Complex religious systems, astronomy, and urban planning developed independently from Europe or Asia. No contact, no shared language. Yet human creativity echoed across continents. Meanwhile, in the north, the Viking Age was slowly evolving. Scandinavian societies were transitioning from raiders to rulers and traders. Around this time, Leif Erikson likely reached the shores of North America nearly 5 centuries before Columbus. A small Norse settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows in present-day Newfoundland stands as archaeological evidence. Imagine that. Europeans briefly touching North American soil around the year 1000, then quietly fading from it. The world was not isolated. It was a web. Trade routes connected Africa to the Middle East. Sea lanes tied China to Southeast Asia. Ideas crossed borders more often than we sometimes assume. So when we picture the year 1000, do we imagine a sleepy, disconnected planet? Or do we see a world already buzzing with exchange, ambition, power, and quiet competition? And yet beyond emperors and gold caravans, beyond stone statues and fortified capitals, most people were not kings or merchants. They were ordinary, farmers, craftsmen, mothers, children, and their daily lives may be the most powerful part of this story. Let us slow down now and step into their world. Now let us gently step away from emperors' gold caravans and million-person cities and sit beside an ordinary fire. Because in the year 1000, history was not mostly made by rulers. It was lived by regular people. Picture a small farming village in what is now France. A wooden house with a thatched roof, smoke drifting through a hole in the ceiling. A family rising before sunrise because daylight is precious. Bread made from barley or rye. Maybe some cabbage stew. Meat, if lucky, during special occasions. Life expectancy at birth hovered around 30 to 40 years, largely because many infants did not survive. But if you reached adulthood, your body would be strong from constant labor. Your hands would tell your story. Now imagine at that exact same moment, a merchant family in Song Dynasty China. They live above their shop in a crowded urban district. They use paper money. They record transactions with brush and ink. Their children might attend school memorizing classical texts for civil service exams, or consider a scholar in Baghdad carefully copying a manuscript by lamplight. He pauses, dips his pen in ink, and continues preserving knowledge that will travel across centuries, different continents, different religions, different languages, but the same human concerns. Will the harvest be good? Will my children survive? Will tomorrow be peaceful? Most people in the year 1000 never traveled more than a few miles from where they were born. News moved at the speed of horses or ships. There was no sense of global events the way we understand them. And yet, through trade and migration, the world was already quietly connected. Religion shaped daily rhythm everywhere. Church bells in Europe, the call to prayer in Islamic cities, Buddhist and Confucian rituals in East Asia. Faith gave structure to uncertainty. And here is something fascinating. Despite wars and hardships, this was also a time of population growth in many regions. Agricultural improvements, such as the heavy plow in Europe and fast-ripening rice in China, allowed more food production. Slowly, almost invisibly, humanity was expanding. If you had asked someone in the year 1000 what the future held, they probably would not have said global empires or industrial revolution. They would have said, I hope for a good harvest. There is something deeply humbling about that. We often imagine people in the distant past as primitive or naive. But in truth, they loved, feared, laughed, and worried just as we do. They stood at the edge of a new millennium without knowing it, just as we stood at the year 2000, wondering what would change. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson of this journey. The world in the year 1000 was not waiting for us. It was fully alive, complex, advanced in ways we sometimes overlook, fragile in ways that feel familiar. As we close this chapter, take one last mental look at that world, lit only by fire and stars. From muddy European fields to the libraries of Baghdad, from the canals of China to the gold roots of West Africa, humanity was already building the foundations of the modern age. Thank you for traveling back 1,000 years with me. If this journey helped you see the medieval world differently, stay curious. There are countless nights in history still glowing softly in the dark, waiting for us to explore them together. Before we leave the year 1000 behind, let us pause for a wider view, because here is the quiet truth. No one living in the year 1000 believed they were standing in the middle of history. They were not waiting for the Renaissance. They were not preparing for the Crusades. They had no idea that within a few centuries, Mongol armies would redraw maps from China to Europe, or that in 492 years, Columbus would cross the Atlantic. They were simply living. And yet from our vantage point, we can see something they could not. We can see momentum. In Europe, slow agricultural improvements, such as the heavy plow and 3-field crop rotation, were increasing food production. That meant population growth. By the year 1300, Europe's population would roughly double compared to the early medieval period. Growth creates cities. Cities create universities. Universities create intellectual revival. In the Islamic world, preserved Greek philosophy and scientific advancement would eventually re-enter Europe through places like Toledo in Spain, influencing thinkers such as Thomas Aquinas centuries later. In China, song innovations in printing gunpowder and the magnetic compass would spread westward over time, shaping global trade and warfare in ways no one in Kaifeng could fully imagine. Even the gold routes of West Africa would later play a critical role in global economics. Centuries after the year 1000, rulers like Mansa Musa of Mali would astonish the Mediterranean world with displays of wealth built on foundations already forming during Ghana's era. History does not move in dramatic leaps every day. It accumulates quietly. The year 1000 was not a climax. It was a hinge. And maybe that is why it matters so much. Because when we look back, it reminds us that progress does not always feel like progress while it is happening. Most transformations begin invisibly. A new farming method, a better canal system, a translated manuscript, a merchant experimenting with paper currency. Small decisions, big consequences. Now let me ask you something gently. If someone were studying our world 1000 years from now, what would they see as our small beginnings? What quiet innovations today will shape their future? The people of the year 1000 worried about harvests, family, faith, and survival. We worry about technology, climate politics, identity. Different details, same human heart. That is what makes history comforting. It reminds us that humanity has stood at uncertain thresholds before. Civilizations have risen, adapted, struggled, and reinvented themselves again and again. And through it all, ordinary people kept waking up, working, loving, building, hoping. So as we gently close this journey to the turn of the first millennium, remember this. The world did not end in the year 1000. It was just getting started. Thank you for spending this time traveling across continents and centuries with me. If this story gave you a new perspective, I would love for you to stay connected. There are so many moments in history that look quiet on the surface but hold incredible turning points beneath. The next story is already waiting in the shadows of another century, and I cannot wait to explore it with you.